20 different anime, 13 books, 12 games, and 35 concepts. All with no spoilers and simple, with nothing unnecessarily confusing. Because people make Fate sound like an absolute headache. So this video is going to be the paracetamol that will help you love this franchise and the masterpieces within it. So let's get started with the basics. Every 60 years, 7 mages compete to have their wish granted by the Holy Grail in what is basically like a small battle royale, except made even more interesting than something like Squid Game by making the prize a wish, easily allowing us deeper insights into the characters through exploring their deepest desires and what they want versus what they actually need. And also by adding several extra layers of tactics, subterfuge and teamwork through the magical inclusion of servants, who have their own desires that don't necessarily line up with their masters, creating a lot of potential conflict and making them not necessarily very subservient servants. Servants are heroic spirits, someone from human history who in some way achieved great deeds during their life.
Jason Bourne, it's Jesus Christ.
Now summoned as a servant into one of the 7 classes, like Saber, Archer, Rider, etc., into the Holy Grail War. There can actually only be one of each class, and heroic spirits have specific classes they can qualify for. So, for example, if you wanted King Arthur but chose to summon an assassin, you would just get someone else. You can choose the class that you summon by adding a line to the summoning ritual, but you can't simply choose the heroic spirit. That requires a catalyst, something with a connection to them. There actually has to be a catalyst, so if you don't have one, then the catalyst will just be you. And you'll summon someone you have good compatibility with and should generally get along with, but who might be weak. So again, if you wanted King Arthur, but you used something like a piece of the round table as your catalyst, which is connected to all of the knights, then which one you actually get will be determined by your personality pretty much, or any other connections you might have to them. So if you do want to summon King Arthur specifically, then you'll need Avalon, her scabbard. The reason actually that she's summoned into the Holy Grail War from the original visual novel, Fate Stay Night, that started the whole franchise, is because the main character actually had Avalon put inside of him using Magecraft when he was younger in order to help him heal. It helped him because Avalon is honestly just kind of broken. It has the power to heal as well as a load of other stuff, but it needs Saber around nearby to really work properly though, so it only really becomes noticeable once she's summoned into the Holy Grail War. Upon being summoned and becoming a servant, the heroic spirit is given the necessary skills and information of the era, so that they can actually know what the fuck's going on and not just spend the whole time freaking out at the existence of a phone and shit. But it also serves to kind of update their skills. For example, Saber from the series has the riding skill because she was a knight, and so could ride a horse very effectively. But that wouldn't be much good nowadays, so when she's summoned, she can now also drive very effectively, like an absolute badass. In addition to skills, they also have a Noble Phantasm, and just like skills sound video gamey, it's probably easiest to explain a Noble Phantasm as just their ult. It is literally the ultimate thing that they're capable of, and generally uses a lot of energy and has to be used carefully. One of the reasons being that it can give away who your Saber is. For example, if you summon a rider and get the heroic spirit Achilles, your chances of winning the Holy Grail War are very high. But they all depend on your ability to keep his identity secret. If you just go around calling him Achilles all the time and unleashing his Noble Phantasm, an ability that generally defines the heroic spirit, people are going to know exactly who he is and to go for his Achilles heel. This is also why Saber hides her sword under an invisible air spell, because if you see Excalibur, the most famous sword in history, you know there's really only one person who would be summoned with it. King Altria. Yeah, her official English name is Altria, rather than a more sensible translation like Artoria that most people generally actually use. Generally, you'll see people blaming Nasu, the original creator and writer of Fate, for this as something that he just insists on for some reason. The reality, though, appears to be merchandising and contracts. In 2010, an official lore book was released with a shoddy translation, and before the next lore book was released in 2016 with a much better translation, the company Furyu had released a figure using the name Altria. And so, contracts and the need for consistency across all of the merchandise are likely the reason that she's still called that to this day. Since I imagine Furyu would have been pretty pissed if they just released a figure of the character and then the company changes their damn name and this figure's just wrong now. Back to the war though, the Holy Grail itself is an omnipotent wish-granting machine that derives its power from the root of all things that all mages generally strive for, in order to gain the ability to use true magic. An ability to do something impossible, which only a handful of people have ever been able to successfully gain. It's called true magic because the magic you will actually see in Fate is just Magecraft, a lesser, weaker form that is powered by mystery itself, and so has gotten weaker over time as humans replaced the gods as the dominant species of the planet and explained more and more with science. As things become more understood by science, there are less unknowns, less mystery, and so less room for magic to exist. Since the Middle Ages, mages began keeping Magecraft secret in order to preserve the remaining mystery and stop it from dying out completely. Something I really like, as it gives the story an actually good reason for all of this to be kept secret, in spite of the massive benefits it could bring to science and humanity as a whole. Unlike a lot of other stories with similar hidden magic worlds that just give no reason as to why they're really hidden, and no one has ever blown the whistle and tried to help just normal people. It also helps though that in Fate, mages are specifically generally absolute dickheads. So it kind of wouldn't even really matter if they didn't have a good reason. They are supposed to be arseholes generally by and large. The 7 mages competing in the Holy Grail War all receive 3 command spells from the Holy Grail with a small portion of its power that they can use to command their servant. Each spell being able to be used to give the servant an absolute order that they can't defy. You can use one to command them to kill someone even if they don't want to. You can even use one to temporarily power up your servant or teleport them across vast distances if you're in danger or there's an emergency. The more vague the command is, the weaker the effect though. So you can't just use one to say you must do everything I say all the time always and basically just cheat. Which matters because you only have 3, and running out means you are considered out of the competition since they are a symbol of your authority as a master and participant in the war. This is one of the rules that were added to the war after the ritual just kept failing due to the 3 mage families that created it just squabbling and fighting and killing each other, and the Holy Church got involved. The Church sending someone to be a neutral party to oversee the war and help enforce the rules and provide a safe place for masters that drop out of the war so that a war doesn't just result in everyone dying and no one winning again. The entire ritual of the Holy Grail War itself isn't a completely original creation within the universe either. It's based on what something called the Counterforce can do. There are 2 types of Counterforce in the world of Fate. Gaia, the planet Earth's will to survive, and Ayaka, the collective unconscious will of humanity to avoid extinction. The Counterforces are passive spirals of energy that act to avoid extinction, most often indirectly by subtly nudging people and things into place with, say, a traffic jam, for example. But more importantly for Fate and the Holy Grail War, against large threats, Ayaka can summon heroic spirits in order to directly fight to prevent disaster. The Holy Grail War ritual then is based on and copies what the Counterforce can do in order to summon the heroic spirits that Ayaka would usually use to protect humanity to instead fight in the war and claim the Holy Grail. This is done consensually too. The heroic spirits have a choice in whether they are summoned to fight in the Holy Grail War. So generally they pretty much all have their own wishes that they want to make using the Holy Grail as well, creating those differences and conflicts with their master. Getting a little bit deeper into the lore now, the reason magic declined so much in the first place when humans took over is because the entire normal world as we know it in the Fate universe is actually something called a texture. A texture is basically a whole reality, and it might be easier to understand if we imagine what it could look like from the outside. From the outside of the Earth and its texture, it could look like a giant bubble was around the planet. That bubble then contains all of reality and the universe as we know it. So if you imagine entering it from the outside, you'd see some kind of bubble, and then once you passed through it, if you turned around, you would see different stars. Our stars and our idea of space. So, in the setting, actually going to a different planet, actually going out into real space, is even more difficult and impressive, since it goes beyond rocket science into actually escaping reality and travelling through dimensions. So the very few aliens that exist in the setting are automatically extremely powerful because of it, and can be extremely alien. In the mobile game, we get to see Ort, the ultimate one from the Oort cloud, a cloud of asteroids and ice surrounding the solar system that came and landed on Earth and literally has no concept of death. It will just adapt and change and keep on going. And as you can see, is bloody weird and clearly alien. Several important characters can also create a reality marble, for example, projecting their own inner world onto reality, effectively creating their own miniature personal texture. The texture of the world as we know it is also basically just the same thing. A reality marble created by the entire dominant species in our world. Which is why magic declined so much when the Age of Gods ended and humans became the dominant species, because the texture changed to match its new owner, effectively changing all of reality. It's essentially kind of like the collective unconscious that we see featured in a lot of things. Like, mementos in Persona 5 is always the thing that comes to mind to me, for example, except that everything is like that, like mementos. This is why probes and rockets and stuff can't just leave, because it basically expands with our understanding of it. But there are also other textures on the Earth, like the reverse side of the world that most fairies, dragons, and other mythological creatures migrated to when it became clear that the human world no longer had a place for them and was becoming hostile. There's also the inner sea of the planet, and Avalon, imaginary number space, and more. It's also how all of the different pantheons of gods could exist at the same time and still have insane powers and full authority to remake the world and everything. India could have its own texture with a cycle of rebirth and gods with full authority over destruction, for example, while Greece and its gods were unaffected and could have full authority over the same thing. Things didn't change and decline equally either. Islands, for example, like Japan or here in good old Blighty, maintained their mystery and mythology longer due to being naturally more separated from the rest of the world. This is how Camelot and Merlin and dragons and fairies and everything could still be present right into the Middle Ages. Japan, with its enforced isolation, even had the full Age of Gods last much longer, which is how all the stories of Oni and Ibuki and Amaterasu etc. can be true, despite not really being that long ago in the grand scheme of things. But after all of that, where should you actually start this massive franchise? As with anything, the true answer is that it's not that complicated. Always just start wherever the hell you really want. No one knows better how you will enjoy something than you do. But that's not to say I can't still help by giving you the 4 main options and explaining their upsides and downsides. The first place you could start is the absolute best option, which, if you were willing to do, you most likely would have just done already, which is to just read the original visual novel. It now has a remastered version on Steam, etc., and it is actually great. I've even read some of Nasu's visual novels just while eating, etc., the same way I would watch any subbed anime, since their presentation is really that good. And if you play and enjoy the story in any Hoyoverse games, you should be able to enjoy this just the same, as their stories are also basically visual novels, only with random lip flaps on characters. You can also read it on your phone though, if the idea of having to sit at a computer or TV to read is what puts you off. Or, of course, you can just watch it on YouTube, and that way you can enjoy even the remastered version anywhere you like. Although you do lose the fun ability to make your own choices and explode at the slightest poor decision. The adaptations are great and all, but for as fantastic as they can be, they have to cut a lot out and leave behind a lot of context and depth. One of the biggest things that has to be cut down is the main character, Shiro's, inner thoughts and characterization, which detracts a lot because despite being known for its action, thanks to ufotable ufoing all over the place, it is a character-focused story, and he is quite a complicated and headstrong character that can come off as generic or frustratingly naive on the surface level that the anime kind of have to exist on due to not being able to put us inside of his head like a visual novel can. And so, while visual novel readers generally always really like him, it is not at all uncommon for anime viewers to really dislike him and think he's an idealistic idiot. That's okay though, Fate is still excellent without Shiro. It wouldn't have a million spin-offs without him if it wasn't. It's just, as amazing as the anime adaptations can be, they just only have so much time. Speaking of amazing adaptations though, our next option is not one of those. The original 2006 anime adaptation by Studio Dean, which is really the source of all of the problems. How good or bad you think it is can vary a lot from viewer to viewer. Some people really do love it, so if you're feeling up to it and are confident you won't be put off of the larger franchise if it is shit, then you can give it a go. Personally, I thought it was terrible, but the dub helped push that into so bad it's good territory for me. But beyond whether or not you're just able to enjoy the series, there is another issue, however, in that it changes and throws in some things from later on in the story in order to try and make a more complete adaptation. Back when they still thought this might be the only one Fate would ever get. Imagine.
Things from later on in the story? What are you talking about?
Why is this so shit? Well, you see, my dear imaginary viewer, the visual novel has 3 routes which have to be done in order. The first one, simply titled the Fate route, Unlimited Blade Works, and then lastly, Heaven's Feel. These are basically 3 complete stories that build on each other, all starting from the same place and then branching off into alternative versions of events, focusing on different characters and main heroines based on your choice. The 2006 Dean anime is the only anime adaptation of the first route, meaning that if you don't like it or want to try it, you're not only missing a large chunk of context and especially character, it's also the part of the story most focused on explaining things. Which leads us to Fate Zero, the third and for a time most most popular place to start, and the only one I don't actually recommend.
So why are you talking about it then?
Because in casual conversation where I can't go through everything, it is the one I would usually recommend, because it goes at a much slower pace and takes the time to actually explain the rules of the universe much better than any of the other anime really do for newcomers. But I don't recommend it in a video like this because I just explained that stuff to you in the section right before this one. And it's different enough that it can put newcomers off of the entire rest of the franchise. Recently, with the Honkai Star Rail Fate collab, I've been reminded just how pushed as the best starting place it was, and just how many people seem to have bounced off of Fate as a result. But that's not at all to say that it's bad, just different. It explains things and is a great show with a dark, mature story. But it has two major cons. One is that it might give you false expectations that prevent you from enjoying pretty much the entire rest of the franchise, like I just said, due to its differences in tone and setting. It just has a different enough atmosphere that if you don't like it, you might still like the rest of Fate, and vice versa. A more thorough introduction and explanations also means a much slower pace and a lot of talking early on so that it can take a while before anything actually really happens. On the other hand though, it was quite common to see people who started with 0 love it, but find nothing else that really lives up to it, and end up disliking the rest of Fate. And while it's hard to tell whether that is because of 0 or just because they wouldn't like most anime to begin with, there's pretty much no question that it helps cause people to dislike the face of the franchise, Saber. And I don't say that as a biased Saber fan or anything. I don't really like her. But then I started with 0. So... And it's not that 0 emphasises a different, unlikable side of her or anything. She's just a completely different, less likeable character for the entire series. Written very out of character with how she is in the rest of the franchise. The original visual novel was written by Kinoko Nasu, but Fate Zero, despite being a prequel with close ties to that original visual novel, was written by Urobuchi Gen. The franchise as a whole has many different writers thanks to all of the spin-offs and everything, but Zero being more directly connected than pretty much anything else, and featuring some of the same characters like Saber, alongside Urobuchi's kind of distinct personal style, makes it a bit incongruous with what follows it if you do start here. The changes to her character were made with Nasu's blessing, as he seems to actually be really great for giving people free rein to do anything that might be interesting with his world and characters, but they are changes. And it also just has all the usual issues of starting with a prequel where you'll have a different experience compared to what it is written around. It is written expecting you to know the original story and to be interested in finding out how the main characters of Zero got to where they are in Stay Night. I almost never think it's a good idea to start with a prequel instead of going in release order. But Fate can be one of the only exceptions though, thanks to the actual start, the Fate first route being awkward as an anime only. The fact that most people have to skip that first route doesn't help Saber either, since it's the only one that actually properly focuses on her. She ends up being misunderstood and really getting the short end of the stick in terms of popularity as a result. To repeat though, Zero is a great show. You should watch it. It is a more adult series unlike most other anime. If you are or know someone who doesn't really like a lot of anime or complains that there are no anime about adults and not just set in school, it is the series for you. And there's a lot more out there too. It's just the larger franchise doesn't quite match that. It's still much more mature than most, but the original visual novel is about a high school student. So there was a chunk of people that were disappointed with the rest of the franchise after starting with Zero and its adult gruff dad protagonist that was the style at the time. So it is great, it's just if you want to enjoy the larger franchise as much as possible and are going anime only, you should ideally watch it after the next option, which is Unlimited Blade Works 2014 by Ufotable, not the 2010 movie by Studio Dean, made as a sequel to their 2006 series. This even seems to be the officially recommended place to start, at least based on Honkai Star Rail's collab branding. By starting here, you miss out on the first route if you don't read the visual novel or watch the Dean anime, but in exchange you get a fantastic show with drop-dead gorgeous animation. And instead of starting with Zero, you're watching and having your expectations set by an adaptation of the actual foundational work itself that everything else spun off from, rather than a prequel written by a different person. After Unlimited Blade Works, you can watch the Heaven's Feel movies to see the final route of the original visual novel, and then lastly, you can watch Zero. Heaven's Feel was released as a movie trilogy, which allows it to be even more stunning, but also results in even more cuts from the source material. If you watch the adaptations but find yourself wanting more depth but still don't want to commit to the visual novel, or you just generally prefer manga, there are manga adaptations. The Fate route is apparently cursed, so its manga is also apparently terrible and maybe even worse than the anime, but both Unlimited Blade Works and Heaven's Feel are very good, although unfinished. There are still enough chapters of them to be worthwhile though, especially Heaven's Feel with over 100 chapters. In general with Fate, if there's something you're interested in, it is probably worth googling if it does have a manga adaptation and if it's any good, because while I'm going to try and mention them all, new ones will start and old ones will finally finish. And I am much less of a manga guy as I am an anime guy. But of course, I'll say again, most of all, it's worth reading the original visual novel, because it's great, and the anime-only experience has no perfect place to start. That also means, though, if there's something you want to watch first, go for it. And if you find yourself not enjoying any of the starting places that I've recommended and explained, feel free to just switch to another one before you fall off of the franchise entirely. You can always just come back to things later. Now, with everything explained, we can finally move into the larger franchise as a whole, and all of the excellent and fucking weird stuff in it. But first, I'll just quickly ask you to subscribe. As a tiny channel that just reached 100 subscribers recently, it would be a huge help. So please subscribe and let's get going again. Starting with Hollow Ataraxia, the sequel to the original Fate Stay Night visual novel that was released only a year later. It's mostly fan service and things that couldn't fit in the original visual novel, but it is actually very good. It's split between daytime and nighttime scenes, with the daytime ones being more light-hearted and slice of life-y, but also allowing us a lot of insight into the characters and their depth through being able to see them in different circumstances. When you're enemies, you might only see someone as ruthless and single-minded, but in different circumstances, when you're not being pitted against each other, you might see that they are a completely different person compared to what you saw in the unusual situation they were in before. Things that couldn't fit in the original visual novel doesn't mean the bumf that wasn't worth the reader's time recycled from the cutting room floor either. It can be important elements that were relegated to the background due to limited time, or simply things that happened before the story. For example, the second main character of Hollow Ataraxia is Bazette, who was actually supposed to be Lancer's master until she died before the Grail War actually really kicked off. That can make her sound like a background detail and simple plot device, but no, she is a really interesting character that even has her own Noble Phantasm, Fragerak, despite being human. Hollow Ataraxia even also features one of the most important characters from the original that we didn't get to see much of since he's basically entirely a spoiler. It is a direct continuation, but not exactly a sequel, because it's kind of a different timeline where all three routes of Fate Stay Night happened simultaneously. But of course, how else are you supposed to make a sequel to something with three very different, equally important versions of events, with totally different outcomes for all of the characters? The only other thing directly connected are the case files of Elmalloy II, which follows a character from Fate Zero 10 years later and ends when Fate Stay Night starts. So it is a prequel sequel. It's set in the Mages Association headquarters in London called the Clock Tower, and so naturally is much more focused on the magic and mages of Fate. It was originally a series of light novels, but it also received an anime adaptation of Volumes 4 through 6, not Volume 1 to 3 because, of course, bloody Fate. The anime skipped the first arc and instead started with 3 anime original episodes. So, if you want the full story, you'll have to read the light novels. There is a manga adaptation if you prefer. You could read the first arc that the anime skipped there, but it hasn't gotten past the anime. And the anime is very unlikely to get a season 2 because characters from the first arc come back. There is also actually a stage play of the first volume if you absolutely must watch it. I can't find anything about a Western release of the Blu-ray or official subtitles, but it is on YouTube and you can watch it with auto-translated subs at least. I don't know if that would be good, but it sure sounds fun. I know that all sounds very complicated and insane though, but don't let that put you off if you just want to watch the anime. It is still very good and works well by itself. It's actually really quite underrated, so get in gan and watch it. It deserves more attention than the barely any that it seems to have gotten, probably thanks to the ridiculous title, combined with Fate's exaggerated reputation of being confusing and difficult to get into. There is still hope for more anime though, because there is more story. There's the Adventures of El Malloy, the sequel light novel series. It's taken on a new name because it now takes place 3 years after Case Files and Fate Stay Night. And so, again, is a vague timeline with elements of all of Fate Stay Night's roots, as several characters from Stay Night have moved to the clock tower and become a part of the story. It doesn't have an anime yet, but it does have a good chance of receiving one in future. With all of that talk of timelines and everything, it's probably a good time to explain why the Nasuverse is a thing. As much as Fate is made out to be more complicated than it is, the Nasuverse is even more so, and has it even worse, with people often not even bothering to try, and in doing so making it out like some inscrutable, mythical, arcane text, when it's not. Basically, Kinoko Nasu, the writer of Fate Stay Night and several other visual novels, generally keeps the world and its rules consistent across his works. So all of that lore I explained and textures and everything all applies to the entire Nasuverse, not just Fate, even though the different stories are not canon to each other. And so you can learn more about the rules and different aspects of the universe in completely separate stories that will still apply to the others. That's it. It's a consistent world and that's all. Every individual story explains what it needs to, it's just that those explanations then become extra unnecessary lore when you experience one of his different stories. So, for example, if you want to really know about magic and the mages of Fate, then you can read Mahoyo, another visual novel from Nasu, actually often considered his best, and so is well worth the read. That, again, isn't really simply canon to anything else, and so isn't necessary for anything else. It just uses the same magic system and allows you to learn about it in more depth. And while making this video, it was announced by Ufotable that it will be coming out this year. At last! Quite a big surprise that it is thankfully coming out before they're finished with Demon Slayer, and especially before they also start with the Genshin anime. We don't yet know when this year or exactly what the movie will cover, whether it's something new or a straight adaptation of the visual novel that would presumably have to be the first part in a series, but we don't have to wait long to find out at least. Hooray! Definitely one to keep on your radar and try and hear about any new information that comes out about it. But anyway, in Nasu's first visual novel, Tsukihime, you'll learn that actually there are vampires running around, called Dead Apostles. They have several different tiers and unique abilities. And in the Tsukihime universe, they seem to be more powerful than they are in Fate, while servants are weaker since Tsukihime is a story focused on dead apostles and not servants, which perfectly illustrates why the Nasuverse isn't actually that scary. There are dead apostles in the world of Fate, and so you can learn a lot more about them by reading the story that focuses on them, but Fate doesn't. So they're weaker and less important there, meaning that it doesn't really matter. The Nasuverse is just a nice extra little layer, not some big scary thing. Tsukihime was also recently fully remade, translated and released on Steam, and it's honestly awesome. It has a really slow start for the first few hours, but that's so that it can really set the mood and sense of normalcy for when it breaks your fucking neck with the turn it takes. It did actually receive an anime in 2003, but it's terrible. Absolutely don't bother, just watch the visual novel at that point. It's a better viewing experience. Also worth mentioning though, in case you're a fighting game fan, there is the Melty Blood series that is connected to Tsukihime. But going into that is getting a bit too off topic, and it was basically all rebooted along with the visual novel remake. But that latest rebooted entry does have a few playable Fate characters from FGO. There are actually a couple of real Fate fighting games though. Tiger Colosseum is a super deformed fighting game made for the PSP, but there's also Unlimited Codes from 2008. A more proper Capcom fighting game made for the arcades, PS2 and ported to the PSP. It's a real shame it released when it did, before Fate really took off with the Ufotable anime and FGO, and before fighting games themselves really took off again after the arcades died. Because a Fate fighting game could have been huge. But Unlimited Codes was only even on sale in the West for a little under 3 years before Capcom lost the license. Thus, it has been kind of just completely forgotten here in the West. Just like I nearly forgot to put it in this video. The most noteworthy of Nasu's other works in terms of anime though is Kara no Kyokai, as it was pretty much fully adapted into 9 movies with great animation and music. So it is an easy one to recommend, and it's very unique and well worth the watch, since it was also made by Ufotable as a series of 9 movies starting in 2007, before they'd even touched a Fate adaptation. Back to Fate though, we can see a good example of the varying timelines with Fate Apocrypha. A bit of a roller coaster of a series with some awesome very high highs but some boring lows. Where during the Third Holy Grail War that took place during World War II, the Grail was instead stolen and taken to Romania. Decades later, the man that stole it has gotten into conflict with the Mages Association, who have sent mages to try and stop him, turning the war into a greater Grail War, where 2 sets of 7 servants are summoned and fight each other as part of a faction. Darnix, the man that stole the Grail's Black faction, and the Mages Association's Red faction. It's just 2 of all of the same 7 classes as usual, so there isn't just Saber, but instead, since there's 2, they're distinguished as Saber of Black and Saber of Red. Which resulted in some jokes at the time about how it sounds out of context, with Saber, Red Saber, and Saber of Red. also because Saberface is a thing, for a few reasons. Partly just as a way for the mobile game to make more variants of a popular character, but mostly because Takeuchi, the character designer of the original visual novel and co-founder of the company alongside Nasu, just has a tendency to do similar work for some reason. A lot of his characters have the same or similar faces, and even in FGO you can see he likes a few poses and uses them often in his character's art. Red Saber is from the Fate Extra games, with an anime, Last Encore, that released close to Apocrypha's anime. It's a very weird anime and unfortunately really not very good. At least as someone who hasn't played the Fate Extra games. It's weird because it's not even an adaptation, it's a sequel to a bad end and really doesn't seem to care about catching you up to speed as a new viewer. I'm very interested to watch it properly and finish it after playing the games though, because it is such a strange and unique foundation for an anime. The problem with playing the games though is that they've been edging us with a remake for years now. Fate Extra Record is a remake of the first game, which was announced all the way back in 2020 and was recently delayed again to spring of this year. I don't blame them with modern game development and Japan taking the pandemic very seriously, but god damn it, I could have played and forgotten the original by now. The original could do with the remake though, being a PSP game from 2010 that has become really quite important over time and spawned its own entire series of games. Its concepts and characters come up loads in FGO, the mobile game, and I've never been able to properly understand them without having played the original game, despite really liking some of the characters. But hopefully I can still explain the basics. It's still a Holy Grail War, but in a completely alternate timeline, where magic dried up and everything is instead being done in a virtual world inside of a computer on the moon, called the Moon Cell, that has been there long before humans and has recorded pretty much all of human history from up there, as well as the people who did great deeds, allowing it to recreate them virtually as this universe's version of servants. Yeah, I'm sure you can see how it's kind of hard to understand from only secondary sources, especially with all the sequels that also get mixed in. There's the original Fate Extra, then Extra CCC from 2013, which has basically an extra route in the form of the Foxtail manga that focuses on the main character, instead having Caster from CCC as their main servant. Then there's Fate Extella from 2016, with its sequel Extella Link from 2018. And so, a problem with the remake and waiting for it, like I have been, is that it's not like it's remaking the entire series, so you'll still have to go back to old portable games after it. Especially because CCC seems to add a lot, based on what I've been able to glean from what is featured in FGO. It does have manga though, so you could read it instead if you prefer. The games have several different routes and variations depending on what characters you side with, while the manga are more limited and focused on specific routes or characters though. But if you're not much of a gamer, or the idea of playing a bunch of old portable games multiple times is unappealing to you, it is an option. For other newer games though, Fate just got one in 2023 with Samurai Remnant. Again, I've been putting off playing it. I actually hope and plan to start it pretty much right after this video, which I'm very excited for because I've only heard good things. It's set all the way back in 1651, in another alternate timeline with the Waxing Moon ritual instead of the Holy Grail War. The real Holy Grail War in the original universe was only first held in the 1800s. And even though it's an action RPG, it still has 3 different routes, like the original visual novel, for more replay value. I don't want to spoil for you or myself who the servants are or anything, but there are a few returning characters that the game was marketed with, like Gilgamesh, who isn't really a participant but instead seems to basically be a shop in the game. Musashi, who seems to somehow be related to the version of her that FGO created. And one of the Tamamo 9 from CCC, I believe, which are formed from Tamamo's 8 discarded tails. Sticking with recent things, let's talk about Fate Strange Fake, which has now finally started. I say finally because until now they were pretty much on a 1 episode per year cadence, with an hour-long prologue released in 2023 and episode 1 released last New Year. And I believe episode 2 was also shown at Anime Expo last year as well. It is, of course, an alternate timeline where the Holy Grail War ritual has been copied by America, yeehaw! And takes place in Snowfield, Nevada in the late 2000s. With it being a copy, it has some fuckery going on, like it's supposed to have lost the Saber class, and instead allows some weirder classes and heroic spirits to be summoned with a slightly faulty definition of the word heroic. I'll be waiting for the anime to finish before beginning the story properly myself, but it looks great. And from what I do know of the story, it has a lot of good twists and turns and extremely interesting characters showing up. I can't really wait. Hopefully you're here because it's gotten into the swing of things and nobody can stop talking about it. If you are here specifically looking to start Strange Fake because people are talking about it, you could start with it perfectly fine, having watched the rest of this video and the basic explanations of what a Holy Grail War is supposed to be and everything, but there are things that it could be enhanced by watching first, since it has a lot of references and does go through things quite fast, like Fate Zero, as both feature the archer Gilgamesh and El Malloy as a character that actually took part in the Holy Grail War of Fate Zero, even in the Strange Fake timeline, and the series makes some small references to it. Speaking of El Malloy, you could also watch Case Files first if you want. There is a small cameo of the character Grey from that in the Strange Fake prologue, for example, but most of all, Flat, one of the masters from Strange Fake, is heavily featured in Case Files. For some additional explanations specific to Strange Fake, there's a few characters I can catch you up on pretty safely. Gilgamesh is the titular character of the oldest known story in history, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and he is in pretty much just about every Fate entry, actually, now that I think about it. He was king of the city of Uruk, kind as a child, but growing up to be a tyrant, thanks to his solitude. So the gods created Enkidu to keep him in line. A clod of clay that was shaped by the gods into a divine being, but that ended up doing its job by befriending him instead. As Enkidu was dying, they told Gilgamesh that they were just a tool made out of clay, not worth grieving. To which Gilgamesh declared that, "In all this world, only one shall be my friend. Thus, not for all eternity shall his worth ever change." Which makes me sad. Gilgamesh's main ability is Gate of Babylon, the ability to basically open portals to his great treasury and retrieve, or most often fire, the contents as weapons. His treasury is supposed to contain everything, all things in the world during his reign, making him an extremely dangerous servant, as that includes the prototypical versions of many other servants' ultimate weapons. His own ultimate weapon, however, is Ea, the Sword of Rupture, that literally split the heaven and earth in Sumerian mythology to create the world as it was known. There's no way I can really explain it and actually do it justice, to be honest. Thankfully though, I don't have to, because Strange Fate did it justice for me. It does also have a manga, with 5 volumes so far, that takes its time to follow the light novels more closely, but because of that, the anime has already gotten ahead of it in only a few weeks. The only other thing I can think of as being recent is the still ongoing Prisma Elia series. The anime series had 4 seasons from 2013 to 2016, but it is actually still going very slowly and keeping up with the source manga in movie form. It got an awesome prequel movie in 2017 called Oath Under Snow, and then the series was continued with the Licht movie in 2021. And another movie has been announced for a long time. The series is a bit of an awkward one to recommend though. It's a kind of slice-of-lifey magical girl parody series for 3 seasons, until they enter an alternate universe timeline in Series 4, and it gets an actually really good plot. It's been too long since I watched it to explain everything you need to know from the first 3 series in case you really wanted to skip them, and I can't rewatch them all for just one section in an already overlong video like this one. But apparently the original manga is much better and didn't have a lot of the fanservice-y gags and shit. And if you try the anime and find yourself losing interest, then you could always just watch the prequel movie Oath Under Snow by itself, as it has a lot of awesome hype moments. The series itself I did still enjoy though. It features a lot of characters you don't often get to see, and in situations they don't often get to be in, like being happy. The series is, say it with me, an alternate timeline where the Grail was destroyed and Elia gets to actually live a normal, happy life. Until she accidentally gets magical girl powers from a powerful talking stick that belongs to the Mages Association. The first series revolves around collecting class cards of servants and the various ways they can be used. Then the second and third involve the new character Chloe, or Kuro as the shortened nickname version is pronounced in Japanese, and how the heck she actually exists. Before the 4th series, like I said, enters an alternate universe and gets a bit more serious. Another light-hearted series is today's menu for the Emiya family, a cooking show surprisingly made by Ufotable, with all the characters living happily, finding their place in normal life, and bonding through food. A great one to watch if you like the characters and just want to see them all interact in ways they never could. The anime adapts the first 3 volumes of manga, but there are actually 12 in total. So if you enjoy it, there's much more to dig into, including a video game for the Switch, released in 2021. There's also Fate School Life, a little gag manga following some students from Fuyuki as the Grail War happens in the background, and it actually only just finished last year after running for nearly 20 years. It also has an anime short produced by Ufotable, where it crosses over with the characters of Fate Grand Order. Then there's also the pure comedy series Carnival Phantasm, where the characters of not just Fate, but also some other parts of the Nasuverse like Tsukihime get into absurd situations, like being completely technologically hopeless and unable to use a simple Blu-ray player, or the original protagonists trying to figure out how they can date all of their heroines from different routes simultaneously. The end features a character from Fate Prototype as a lead-in to the short Prototype OVA that was released in Carnival Phantasm's 3rd Blu-ray. Prototype is based on the original plans and ideas for the Fate Stay Night visual novel, before Saber was gender-bent and the main protagonist was instead a woman called Ayaka Sajo. It only has this short 10-minute OVA and the production notes that have been shared from the original visual novel, but there is a prequel series of light novels, Fragments of Sky Silver, that were fully covered in drama CDs, and started receiving a manga a couple of years ago as well. Sky Silver has a fairly short side story called Labyrinth as well, and lastly there's also a Christmas-themed drama CD that I think is a sequel taking place after the Grail War that we barely actually get to see, called On-Ship Christmas Murder. Carnival Phantasm, though, got a spiritual sequel in 2021 with Fate Grand Carnival, which is a comedy series instead focused on the various characters of Fate Grand Order, where we see things like the Mesopotamian goddess Ereshkigal becoming a live streamer. And with that, I think it's finally time to talk about the monster that is FGO. You can get a reasonable anime-only experience now. Start with the little-known Fate Grand Order First Order OVA, which depicts the prologue/tutorial story of the game, and then you go on to the Camelot movie duology. It's far from ideal to watch the Camelot movies rather than read the game's chapter, as the story is massively cut down in order to fit into only 2 movies, and people were widely disappointed by them. The first one especially is not very good, having to cut so much of the time in between events where we can actually get attached to the characters. But still, the original story is very good, and you get movie quality animation. Kind of. The first one is actually weirdly bad in that regard. Arash especially gets done so dirty with such a weak fight that makes him look like just a dude with a bow rather than someone that literally helps us travel in the game by just fucking shooting us several miles using his archery. But I digress. The second movie is better, at least, and they do prioritise giving enough time to Bedivere, the main new character of the story, and his great arc. Then, after Camelot, you go on to the excellent Babylonia TV anime, but we'll get to that in a moment because going from First Order to Camelot does actually mean skipping 5 chapters of story from the game. But they're really quite filler from the first year of the game, where it was still just a cheaply made cash grab, basically. Before it made a lot of cash. Camelot is widely considered the place where the story actually gets good, and the preceding chapters really don't have much of importance in them or really even explain things. The most important one, I'd say, is Chapter 4, the London Singularity, as it's where the characters actually meet the villain for the first time. If you want to read it, it literally only takes a couple of hours, and features a load of servants from Fate Apocrypha. Its biggest issue is it features a lot of little story segments that are just pure filler. Monsters show up as an excuse for some gameplay that the game thankfully stopped doing once the story actually got good. If I have time, or this video does well enough, or it's requested enough, I might upload the story of the chapter with all those bits cut out to YouTube as an unlinked video. If I do, I'll link it as a card in the top right corner and in the description, but you can also read it as a manga if you prefer. Fate Grand Order actually has several manga. For the early story, there's both Turris Rialta and Mortalis Stella. They both cover the prologue and the first singularity, but then from there, Turris Rialta covers the 3rd, 5th and 7th chapters, as well as Solomon, the finale, while Mortalis Stella is supposed to cover the even numbers, the 2nd, 4th and 6th chapters. Except that it has fallen way behind and still hasn't even gotten to the 4th chapter of the game. I'd recommend, if you want to read every chapter from the game, that you start with Turris Rialta, and then after the game's first chapter, called the Orleans Singularity, you then switch to Mortalis Stella, and start switching between whenever you do finish a singularity. There are also actually stage adaptations if you want a totally different experience. The tutorial story doesn't have one, but Camelot, Babylonia and the finale do. The finale is even on Crunchyroll for easy viewing, but Camelot especially might actually be worth watching though, since the movies are so inconsistent. According to the wiki, it's on Amazon to rent, but it again is just here on YouTube.
My name is Ojimadia. Odo Nakano.
Like I said, the early chapters don't even really explain things any further than the prologue though, so I'll do my best to do so for you here instead. Basically, the game is about the Chaldea Security Organization, whose purpose is to protect humanity after tools used to look into and calculate the future could see nothing past a specific year. The game starts and the incineration of humanity happens, and Chaldea, being all that's left, has to try and put things right. The cause of the incineration are 7 singularities throughout time. Solomon, known as the King of Mages, has sent a Holy Grail, which in FGO is more simply like just a strong concentration of magical energy, to 7 different time periods throughout history. The Holy Grail then warps reality and distorts history, which results in humanity no longer existing in the modern day. So the main characters get sent to those times by Chaldea by ray shifting to them, which is just a way of time travelling without adding time travel as something that is possible in the universe and opening that whole can of worms and everything else that it entails. It's something that's only really possible to do into a singularity, and only for Chaldea with its several specialised pieces of technology, like Sheba, which can look back into history in order to constantly confirm that the characters sent back do in fact still exist there. Really, it's a lot of techno-majo mumbo-jumbo to try and make it sound like it makes sense and place limitations onto it. Inside a singularity, they'll generally have to figure out what's going on, what's different, and who actually has the Holy Grail that they need to recover in order for the singularity to just disappear and correct itself. In addition to fighting whatever enemies have been put in their way by the Grail holder, they generally also have to defeat one of Solomon's minions, one of his 72 demons that you will have certainly heard the names of in other things. It's not only enemies that can be encountered though, but also potential allies, as rogue masterless servants have been summoned by the Counterforce within the singularities to try and correct things, but generally have no idea what's really going on themselves either. After Camelot, then comes the main meat of the anime-only Grand Order experience, the highly regarded Babylonia series. It features some familiar faces, but they are just faces. Ishtar and Eresh look like Reen because gods are too powerful to be contained as a servant under normal circumstances. To get around this, they can possess a human body that has good compatibility with them from human history. And that just happens to be Reen because we want to be able to play her in the game even though she was human and not a servant. After Babylonia, you can then finish the first arc of the game's story with the Solomon movie, which is also the last chapter of the game to be animated. Even though, unfortunately for anime-only viewers, the story still only really honestly gets better from there with the next arc. The story of which has literally just finished in the game's 10th year, and features, brings back, and explains loads of things from all the way back in the beginning 10 years ago. It's honestly amazing. If you want to continue after the anime, you can read the kind of epilogue chapters of the game's first arc in manga form. They're optional to do in the game because they're not really required, but the Shinjuku and Seraph chapters are very good. Otherwise, there is actually one more animation that takes place after Solomon and the game's first major arc, but before the second. Moonlight Lost Room, a 30-minute OVA from all the way back in 2017 that doesn't adapt any story from the game and instead is about a lost room within Chaldea that exists between reality and a dream. It was really quite an oddity, but now that the game's story has actually ended 8 years later, it's now understood just how much it set up, hinted at, and gave away about the game's conclusion all those years ago, before the game's second arc even began. But that second arc is completely unadapted. I think even the only manga for it is Fate Grand Order from Lostbelt, which isn't an adaptation, but rather more of a companion piece you can read if you want, with each short chapter being about a different character from the game's late story, that can just show some of their backstory and make you feel things based on what you already know from the game. So, if you want to actually experience the game's excellent Lostbelt arc, you can watch someone play it on YouTube, but I do highly recommend the game itself. It's really become just one of my favourite games with how great the story is, and how much I personally enjoy the gameplay and everything as well. And with the game's story having, for the time being, definitively concluded, the future of the game is pretty up in the air, so if you've any interest in it at all, it's probably a good idea to play it while you can. The ending also really proves that it is not just a pandering gacha story. If you do play it, you need to go into it expecting and treating it as a real, serious story, at least once you get past the fillery shit bits, because it will take things away from you, finish and conclude characters, kill people off, and absolutely break your heart. I cannot recommend enough that you experience the second arc, the Lostbelts, in some form. They've ruined most every other gacha game's story for me by comparison, and have stuck with me like little else. The entire earth gets bleached, like its texture has just been removed, and across the world 7 trees are planted which manifest alternate realities, failed timelines that were pruned for seemingly having no future, in hopes of one of them growing and becoming the Earth's new reality and gaining enough energy to birth the alien god. It might sound similar to part 1 with 7 distortions in time to fix, but the difference from part 1's singularities is that we were travelling into the past at the point it was being changed, so they were still relatively familiar. The Lostbelts, though, diverged at some unknown point in the past and have continued on from there for potentially thousands of years, allowing them to potentially diverge massively. Because they are more severely diverged actual alternate realities, it means they can break or have different rules too, and contain far, far more powerful and unusual inhabitants. For example, one is a world where the Greek gods never declined and the age of gods never ended, putting us into direct conflict with the Pantheon and Zeus himself, requiring us to learn about their true origins. As a result of how much longer they have gone on, these are more like entirely different worlds that we have to entirely snuff out and effectively genocide, in order to just try and save our own reality. The Lostbelts don't even really seem to be the cause of the destruction of humanity this time. They just have to be cut down to make sure there is space for our world to come back, and to make sure the alien god can't use the energy inside of the trees. Just for that, we have to wipe them out and effectively kill all of the inhabitants. All of the chapters are very subtly about various aspects of humanity, like freedom, the necessity of imperfection, innocence and cruelty, and how it can spread and create more of itself. I've seen people take away a hatred for some inhabitants of the alternate timelines, and I just don't think that was the point or intention. They're all still representations of humans with complexities, exceptions, and are victims of fate. In the chapter I'm most alluding to, the worst, most evil person isn't any of the creatures from the alternate timeline, but pretty much the only normal human from our world. It's not really the right place to go into it though, but I personally found it far more interesting and affecting to remember the positives and see things from the perspective of even the seemingly cruelest characters. And I wanted to emphasise that for first-time readers. For an example that doesn't really require spoilers, in one of the Lostbelts, humans never really evolved, and intelligent dinosaurs are the dominant species. And it uses this to explore humanity and our weakness and our strength in a way I've not really seen a story do before. Through exploring a species that evolved into intelligence at the absolute peak of the food chain, with no personal weaknesses that have to be made up for with a group or with innovation. The Danos are just better than us. They're almost certainly not at all what you're thinking when seeing friggin' dinosaurs. They live in a pure utopia of absolute peace. After the event that took place and changed the timeline, they evolved to be solar powered and no longer need meat. Meaning that as massive dinosaurs evolving into hyper-intelligence with no predators, long lifespans and extreme strength and defenses, they just view life subtly but fundamentally differently. They're essentially already perfect. I mean, not literally, it's not like they're omnipotent, unkillable gods, obviously, but they have no needs to fill, no weaknesses to cover for. So, as a result, they have less ambition. They developed less despite being smarter than us. Which I think is interesting considering how we can often place our own intelligence on a pedestal, and often denigrate the intelligence of other beings as a result. Like, no, dolphins are really smart, but they're not comparable to us at all, because if they were, they would have our society. It's surely the only logical outcome. Except it's not. There are more things and more factors that go into it. They can be smarter than us, but just different. Differently intelligent or with different priorities. Heck, even when you look at our current society and everything we've accomplished, it can be hard to not occasionally think, gee, maybe this was all a mistake and we would have been better off just being happy. Things like that. Are dogs less smart because they haven't built skyscrapers? Or are they smarter because they realised that they can just sit on a couch happily and get tummy rubs whenever they like? So, for the Danos, when they learn we're there to get rid of their world, to bring back our own, they don't even mind. They have no innate fear of death. They know that when it's their time, it's just their time, and there's nothing they can do about it. They simply accept it gracefully, but they're happy. They might not have skyscrapers and fucking phones and social media, but they don't need them. They live simple, happy, peaceful lives, and the story is able to effectively juxtapose the differences between the two species in order to learn more about ourselves. And I think why it feels different to other media that have done similar is that it doesn't really feel like it picks a side. The point of the juxtaposition isn't just to show how much we need a fear of death and how much better we are for limited lives and how much we've accomplished and changed things and taken control of our environment and how much better we are for living limited lives, etc., yada yada yada. It shows both sides. The Danos have stagnated but are happy, while we are still developing and changing, but are cruel and full of conflict. It's also only a small part of the story. It's one chapter out of more than 7, and more than that, the main conflict of this chapter isn't so much to do with the Danos. They specifically aren't an obstacle to be overcome or anything, they're just kind of there. This is just an added layer that you can begin to understand and think about as you spend time with the Danos and unravel their mystery, so that you can understand and truly mourn the species and world you are genociding and condemning to the void, so that you can feel empathy with the beings that you are affecting and doing things to, and understand and feel what it would be like and the consequences of it if it were you that were the Lostbelt, the alternate reality that is a threat to ours or some other reality and had to be cut away. The point is understanding, not grandstanding about our achievements or trying to cope with our own inevitable deaths or anything like that. There was also FGO Arcade, a fully 3D action game with an alternative version of the same story. It's almost exactly what a lot of people have wished for a long time, a fully 3D FGO. But, as the name suggests, it was made exclusively for the arcades in Japan. And on top of that, it basically cost a fortune, combining gacha with the cost of an arcade game. Hopefully though, they use the assets, or at least the skills gained from making a 3D version of the game to do something in the future, because they recently actually announced Arcade's end of service. So even in Japan, you won't be able to play it very soon. Apparently you can emulate it at least. Onto the weird stuff now though. FGO actually has a lot of fun supplementary material like learning with manga. And get this, manga that has you learning about FGO and how to play it for 15 chapters before it becomes learn more with manga, and ironically has you learn less, as it now is much more about the comedic antics of these versions of the characters. This version got 84 chapters before changing to learn even more with manga, and that version has now been going for over 381 chapters and is still in publication. That's a lot of learning, and not just with manga, since it also has a short anime made by A1 Pictures, which is fully available, subtitled officially right here on YouTube. So many memes in the game's community and in Fate's community in general originate here, with it even getting a collab event in the Grand Order game itself. It's crazy, but only the start. There is similarly Fujimaru Ritsuka Doesn't Get It, another gag manga about Chaldea that also has a full YouTube show. The animation is simpler, but there's a lot more of it, with it having received 3 whole seasons of short episodes. Teach Us FGO, The Grand Order of Greats and Legends, is 2 volumes of manga going over the backstories of some of the servants from the game's story, giving us a chance to learn more about them and their history, with some shenanigans along the way. There have even been little April Fool's games made based on the art of Learn With manga, like Fate Freedom Order in 2021 and then Pixel Wars the next year. So many things have been done for April Fools over the years. It's actually crazy. An event from the game even got a short manga side story. Saber Wars 2 was basically like a ridiculous Star Wars parody in Fate that just cranked all of the servant shenanigans up to 1,000,000 and has a whole servant universe where servants just fly around in space. It was just fucking wild and weird, but somehow still had a great story, and so got 4 chapters of an extra little story about a race between bounty hunters using that setting and the characters from the event. I didn't know about it until making this video, and I think I might actually see if I can read it after, because I really enjoyed the story of the event in the game, and especially the main character of it and her arc, so heck yeah, I would love some more. As you can probably tell by now, Type Moon, the company that owns and created Fate, can be really quite free and more open than most about letting people do potentially anything with their IP if it could be interesting. I imagine because the original founders, Nasu and Takeuchi, are still in charge, and because the company actually started off as a doujin circle, just releasing their stories in any ways they could at conventions and everything. We can really see it come through in some of their stories. One of the best events in FGO, for example, was about the entire experience of making doujins and releasing your work at Comiket. It's no wonder Fate has been so popular with other creators over the years. I think that's how we get things like Fate Mahjong Night Holy Tile War, a parody manga that combines the original story of Fate Stay Night with Mahjong. Yeah, who thought of that? A mobile game called Capsule Servant was made based on a mini-game included in the PlayStation Vita release of Hollow Ataraxia. The mini-game is apparently really fun, but it isn't included in the remastered, officially translated version on Steam, and Capsule Servant itself has never been released outside of Japan. So while it looks interesting, it is unfortunately quite inaccessible. Guda Guda Order was a manga that came out before FGO and somewhat followed news of its development and stuff, but the Guda Guda whole goes so deep. The whole thing started in Koha Ace, a super deformed fourth wall breaking parody manga that stars Kohaku from Tsukihime, and it created many characters using Japanese historical figures like Oda Nobunaga that have then basically taken on a life of their own ever since. with yearly Gura Gura events in FGO, their own spin-off manga Gura Gura Ace and its sequel, culminating in Type Redline, a manga that takes these characters and then actually takes them seriously and creates an excellent story around them that's still ongoing, where a mage who has rejected the world of Magecraft and just wants to live a normal life gets sent 75 years back in time and accidentally summons a Saber, having no idea what a Holy Grail War or anything is. There's the Lost Einherjar light novels, which just started in 2022 and are kind of like a sequel to Fate Apocrypha, being set in the same timeline 10 years later. This time there's a doubles Grail War in Norway, where two servants have to fight together as duos, and as you can tell from the name and setting, it focuses a lot on Norse servants. Then Fate Requiem, a light novel series about a world where everyone has a Holy Grail and a servant that started in 2018. But after the second volume released in 2020, there has been no further news. So at this point, it's probably just dead. Lastly, Garden of Avalon, a novel written by Nasu himself, and released with the second Unlimited Bladeworks Blu-ray in 2015. It's short, but it's kind of Fate's version of the actual Arthurian legend and Saber's backstory, and was actually the first time we got to see Merlin. I only actually found out about it recently while making and researching this video, and I wish I'd known about it sooner because I've really wanted to know more about Fate's version of the legend, especially after reading alternate versions in FGO. But unfortunately, I haven't had time to read it before making and finishing this video. Please let me know what other complicated or large franchises you can think of. This isn't just an engagement bait question. My questions never are if I ask one in a video. I'm going to make a video like this for Gundam at some point, but I can't really think of any other franchises like this, and now I'm just genuinely curious what else is out there and what else I'm forgetting and is just a really obvious example that is just not coming to mind for some stupid reason. Otherwise, if you're looking for something else to watch, I haven't made a lot of videos yet, but I'm still proud of my one about the unique strengths of anime that didn't really do very well since it's a bit like 3 separate videos in a trench coat, but that trench coat is the connecting theme of the importance of the artist and how great anime is thanks to them. I might at some point remake it with my improved knowledge of YouTube and release them as separate videos that are easier to actually sell and package and explain, but maybe not, because it'll end up a full remake that takes as long as just making a whole new video, I'm sure. So, yeah, if you're interested in anything I just said, subscribe. Until hopefully next time, bye.